Hello, everyone on the internet, and welcome back to the Sound Horizons podcast presented by TuneTrack. I'm Rick, and today we have the privilege and the pleasure of speaking with a literal pop music legend. That's right. If you've listened to any music of any type of weight, value, or substance over the past God knows how many years, you have more than likely heard this gentleman's work. And now, for whatever reason, he's so bored, he's going to let us talk to him for a while, so we consider ourselves lucky. Ladies and gentlemen, without further ado, I present to you the one, the only, the man, the myth, the legend, Mr. Elliot Scheiner. Dun, dun, dun. How are you, Elliot?
I'm good. How are you, Rick?
It doesn't matter. I'm here, and I'm happy that you're here.
I'm happy to be here.
So I have this burning question about your career that has always fascinated me. And throughout the years, you have been a part of, and now obviously I don't have the scientific data to back this up, but what I can see with my eyes, you have been a part of more collections, greatest hits, compilation records than I've seen anyone else do. You seem to be a guy that for a while, when they were putting something together, whether it was a definitive collection or the greatest hits, they would call you. And I'm curious about the skill set. So you have such a varied skills, engineer, producer, mastering engineer. What, when they call you to do these sort of compilations where the music's, already been recorded or mixed or released, what is that like for you on the back end? How do you go about that?
Well, number one, I don't remember a lot of that.
Oh, man, you should check your discography.
The one thing that I got called in to do was a Toto record, which was every album they'd done.
Oof.
And they asked me to just be at the mastering session and actually give guidance on mastering all these records, which, every one or two records were done by different people. So it was an interesting concept asking me to come. Each engineer is set in his own ways, and you tend to do what you think is right for what you do. And now I had to consider, like George Mesmer's album, Greg Ladani did a bunch of albums. Hal Schmidt did an album. I mean, all these guys I know had done albums, and now I had to sit inside their head and try and realize how they wanted to sound. And yet they Toto wanted it to be better than what came out originally. So that's the only thing. I don't remember. I've done box sets. I did a Fish box set where they had like 13 CD equivalent projects. And I think there were actually 20 CDs in the box because it was a lot longer. When they played, there are some cases they'll play a song for 40 minutes. And you sit here mixing a Fish song for 40 minutes, and I try to get the best out of it that I can. And I found myself at times just trying to wake up a little bit.
Well, you bring up a great point. I'm curious. So throughout your career, as you're mixing a record, do you in your mind have a particular mastering engineer? Like while you're mixing this, are you thinking, gee, I hope so-and-so masters this, or I hope they pick up on this? I mean, do you have sort of that, if you're not involved in the mastering and you're just mixing, do you have preferences that you're setting in your head?
Yeah, I do. For the longest time, it was Bob Ledwig. And Bob and I started within months of each other at A&R Recording in New York. We both worked for Phil Ramone. And Bob was the first mastering engineer I'd ever worked with, and on stereo, and it was I think it might have been Van Morrison, but it was like you don't think about it. For me at that time, it was, oh, this is going to Bob, and Bob wasn't famous yet.
Hmm.
Soon after, within a few years, he was the guy. And you just hope you could work with someone like Bob. But there were times like when he moved to Maine, it was tough if you wanted to be there. And he did it for a reason. He was trying to keep people away so he could do his work.
Smart.
And it was right. You didn't need to really be there. You went there because you can get a lobster and hang out for a while. But I never really thought about who should do it. There are a bunch of mastering engineers I've used a lot. There was Bob, there was Ted Jensen, there was Darcy Proper, and there was Los Angeles guy. He did the Total record. Really good. But yeah, I've only had like 4 guys I really worked a lot with. And there were some where I was asked to, hey, why don't you get this person to master the record? In one case, I did. And I got that ref the next day, and I didn't know what the song was. In the past 15 years, mastering engineers, the younger, newer ones, feel that they have to put their imprint on what they do, and they'll do things that are so not what you've given them. Change the whole concept of what the record should sound like. Where you, like, for example, when you do an album like Gaucho or Asia, and you spend, like Gaucho was 22 months of working between recording the initial tracks and mixing. That was a long time. So you want to get a guy that will hold true to what you did. I mean, you've taken 22 months and made it perfect for yourself and for Steely. And, you want that. And so we always got guys that would take that into consideration.
Wow. Well, and when I think about you saying 22 months to do one record, I mean, I don't know many artists that could keep their head in 2 or 3 songs for a month, let alone for 22 months trying to get this sort of opus masterpiece. When you look back on that, at the time, did you feel all 22 months, or did it go like that? Did it just go quickly?
Well, we were such good friends. Everybody were friends with Gary and with Donald and Walter and Roger. We just loved hanging out with each other. So you come into work, and I didn't do everything. 22 months was a project. I did all the tracking and mixed it. And things like vocals and horns and overdubs, Roger did most of that. So it wasn't terribly time consuming. I had other things I had to do anyway. I couldn't, the thought of doing overdubs with Steely was like anything but that. I did the guitar solo for Peg, I thought. And it had about five or six different guitar players. And at one point, we had Rick Derringer in, and he played a great solo, but they didn't like it. So immediately after that, Walsh came in and tried the solo. We spent maybe 8 hours on like an 8-bar solo. And we all thought this is great. And Walter listened to it after he finished. And he said, erase it. So there was 8 hours. That's why
Uh,
I hated doing overdubs with them because you'd climb up a wall, put your fingers at the top of the wall, and then somebody would say, erase it.
uh. So
So
Gaucho also has this unique designation as being one of the first records, if not, I think, if not the first record to utilize Roger's Wendel drum machine for public consumption, and that Wendel actually got a platinum record for that. Wendel was actually awarded a platinum record for that
yeah,
record as well.
it,
What is that like for you as a mixing engineer? You're watching. I mean, not only is it the debut of this machine, but he literally invented the machine to service this particular record, and it goes on and becomes kind of the standard. What's that like?
uh, it was great because number one, because sort of like what Tune Tracks does, you pick engineers who have a specific sound and you're going to record that. For Wendell, I recorded most of the sounds in there.
Mm,
So all the cartridges was stuff I recorded. So it was easy for me to deal with that. I had no problem. And when you, unlike today, at the time in 1980,
hmm
moving a snare drum a few, hardly moving it, you know,
Sure.
was amazing. And I couldn't hear it when I'd see Donald and Walter and Roger maneuvering snare drums. I'd go, oh, look, that sounds great. You know, oh, no, just a few microseconds more,
Yeah.
okay. But never had any problem with Wendell. The drag about that, and I've fought over and over now for Roger. Roger was a dear friend, and that was really the first DAW,
Absolutely.
and never received credit for it.
Mm.
Not at all. And it's a shame. It was a lot of tough work. I mean, he took so much time off from recording just to do that for those guys. So they
To
still,
me, it's still the sort of that dichotomy of the fact that here's Roger who can go and get some money from a record budget because there's already two funny things: money and a record budget,
yep,
and then go buy some military grade, you know, late '70s post-war computer equipment and take this concept of moving drums. I mean, the thought process behind that in and of itself, and then let's just debut it on this follow-up to this, with this legendary studio band. I mean, these two records, so Asia and Gaucho, are used, as you know, I'm sure you've heard a million times over, by most engineers when they're testing monitors or even testing live PA systems. These are standards that you've been a part of. And
yeah,
I just find that mindset of let's just be wild. Let's see if it works. We have no idea if it's going to work. We've got these drummers. And the other thing that I'm sure, most people appreciate is Wendell as a machine is playing with these world-class players that are spread out on this record as well. It's not like Wendell did all the work, but you've got Porcaro on this record. You have all these legends and then a machine.
yeah.
It's crazy. It's crazy.
It was when he made Wendell Jr., that was so simple to use when you think about what he created in that time period.
Yeah.
I used to use it on a lot of whenever I get tracks to mix for someone else, only mix, and I'd listen to the drums and go, "Oh God, this is awful," and I'd call up Wendell and just
Yeah. Solved a lot of problems. And like you said, way ahead of its time, way before we were moving things around in the computer like it's nothing. It was there. And that brings up a question I think about too with your storied career. You've worn so many hats. If I were to take the two, mixing and producing, do you prefer one over the other, or do you look at them as they're the same thing?
um It's kind of the same thing in some respects. Like I just finished an album with Madeleine Peyroux, and engineering the tracks and producing that was totally fine. I have no problem with that.
Hmm.
When it came time to do vocals, it's tough for me. I used to be able to do it very well, but now um, I do everything old style with vocals. I actually ride the fader.
Wow.
I seldom use any compression. I don't ever want to. I remember as a kid getting to that place where you put a 670, a Fairchild on a vocal, and that was reasonable. You would only catch certain peaks, but over the years, some of the compressors would catch everything, and you'd get to the point where you've screwed up vocal, and there's no way to fix it. You do it on tape,
Sure.
and you can't just take the compressor off. So, in this case, my son's an engineer, and I called him up here. We did vocals at my place, and I just listened, and he engineered.
Hmm.
And he knows the way to do stuff, and it was fine for him.
Wow. That's convenient. Yeah, you grab your own replacement.
Yeah, it is. I mean, everything else I'm okay with. It's just vocals that I can only produce. I can't engineer.
When you look at your technique over the years, is there anything you still do right now from a recording technique standpoint that you never have changed? It's always been the same since you started.
Everything.
Really?
Well, except consoles. But I work on a console in the studio in Rhinebeck, New York. He's got an old Neeve 8058, and that's where I worked on the tune track stuff.
Yeah.
It's the most brilliant console room. I mean, he even have sets of drums that are unbelievable.
Yeah.
That's generally the way I like to do it. I mean, now it's Pro Tools. There are some people who would like to do tape, but become very expensive.
Hmm.
And it's difficult. But in terms of recording, I never use a compressor anywhere on recording initially.
Wow. Okay.
For me, it's still writing. I gotta feel like I'm doing something.
Sure. Wow. That's pretty impressive, actually.
Yeah, I just like doing that. And
So
in the sense, like with a jazz band, when you're doing that, when you're writing vocals and you're anticipating what a guy's going to play or what he's not going to play, reach or don't reach, and it becomes part of the recording with it's good, bad, it's still something that you took part in. I mixed Derek and Dominoes in Immersive. And I got a call from the organ player. And he said, on this one song, there's no fade, we just stop. And I'm sort of hanging over a bit. I said, yeah, I know. It's like not even an eighth note. You hung over. He said, well, could you get rid of that? Because now it was on a workstation. I said, well, if I do that, everybody knows what that was. And they wait for that to happen. And I felt guilty trying to change what the inherent recordings was doing. And finally, I talked him into it, and he said, okay. But when an engineer or a musician would get involved, it was a performance.
Hmm.
Everything was the engineer and musicians performed. And whatever happened usually stayed. When I worked with Van Morrison, if there was something wrong, but the take was good, maybe you could fix it, maybe not. But or you'd end up just cutting it down and mix a little bit. But it was performance, the band, and the engineer, and the producer, and everybody took part. It wasn't, and I'm not, I don't object to this, but it's not like, well, let's record the drums. And I have a bass player in Chicago. We can call him and we can send him. It's not that. It wasn't that.
Sure.
And what happens today is totally fine with me. Preference-wise, I prefer the old method. I like being in the studio with the band.
Sure.
I like hearing what they do, how they play with each other. So
it's a different time now. But to your point, again, for all of the things that maybe we've lost along the way, there are so many things we've gained. And one of those you sort of alluded to with the immersive speaker setup these days. And you were one of the early adopters of this technology. And this is, people look at it now like it just came out last year, but this is something that's been growing for years and years and years. Is this, for you, as exciting as some of the other innovations your career is so epic that you've seen, the transition from tape to home recording to DAWs to ADATs to, you've seen all of it. So now you get to the immersive part. Are you just as excited about this technology now as you were the others, or is this more exciting in any way to you?
It depends on how it comes out.
Sure.
But it is very exciting. Trying to handle 10 speakers and make it similar to the mix that was there, but having it be better. I'm doing a mix now that I did in stereo, and the stereo mixes were great. But now listening to the immersive and going, oh my God, this is unbelievable.
Well, sure. When you do the immersive mixes, do you find that studio recordings or live recordings tend to translate better in that format or are more favorable to you?
Generally, the studio is better. You have more separation with a lot of things. The very first album I did in immersive was the Eagles Hotel, Hell Freeze It Over. And a lot of leakage. They were live on stage, but it turned out okay. It really was a good recording, was a good mix.
Sure.
And speaker manufacturers, it wasn't like engineers putting it up to see how a room sounds. It was speaker manufacturers putting it up to see how their speakers sounded.
Yeah.
So I liked it.
I'm sorry. Do you think there's a time coming in the future where that's going to be more of a standard? Do you think that all artists are going to have to consider immersive as we move sort of into the new generation, or is it still something that's just going to be for some artists? Or I'm curious on your thoughts. We know if Apple has their way, obviously everything's going to be immersive all the time.
Right. They demand, but remember that Apple really doesn't play immersive. They play a binaural, and they want to sell you a binaural. And that's okay. I think Dolby and Apple got in there saying to a UMG or Warner Brothers, we have a new market for all the people that bought your stereo mixes. We now have a new stereo mix. And in some cases, it worked. In other cases, I find that when I've downloaded a binaural and compared it to a guy's stereo, going, oh my God, The stereo has so much more to say. There's no consideration in that respect what a guy was thinking about when he mixed it. Binaural is just trying to get stuff a little more than in your left and right and have a feeling that it's coming towards the top of your head. So I don't know if it helps the actual intent of the mix. And there are a lot of artists who say, no, I won't do this. And Apple still carries their material in stereo. So they feel it's not worth it to do this. And what the record companies are doing, like, they don't hire guys who are experienced, who might have done the original mixes to do the immersive. They're getting a lot of guys who are fresh out of school or they were assistants a month ago, and now they're doing immersive. And for a lot of people, you look at, for example, take like a Van Morrison Moondance. They don't even know what that is, and they're trying to put it together and saying, well, do this, do that, but it's not the intent. It was the intent.
Do you remember when you sat down to go through maybe your first couple of immersive mixes, what that learning curve was like for you? Was it like starting all over again, or did you kind of have a concept of where you wanted to go?
No, it was starting all over again. Wow. Because it was 5-1 at the time, and I was dealing with the Eagles, and I couldn't figure out where to put them, where to put their voices, what comes out of the back. And by the time, their show started with just acoustic guitars and acoustic bass, playing and singing. And that's all it was. And I kept them up front. I thought, they're the band, that's where they should be.
Sure.
But as different people came in, they had other guys now adding stuff, more keyboards, more guitars, another drummer. They were coming in the back. Strings. It became very immersive in where everybody was sitting. And a couple of guys said to me, you're taking a great chance doing this. The mixes sound good, but it's so different from what they all done originally. And it's true. I took a chance, and I think it paid off.
I think the work speaks for itself, like you said. But to your point, at the time, with nothing before you to measure it by, like, well, how is this done with legends beforehand? You're sort of a trailblazer.
Yeah, I did have one thing that I listened to. It was Boys to Men.
Wow.
No. It was a vocal group. What was their name? 5 guys. Very first, just vocals.
Wow.
Jazzers.
Okay.
Sort of. But, what they had, there were 5 of them, and there was one guy in each speaker.
Okay.
A little
more simple.
But it was only singing, so I got an idea that you could do whatever you wanted. And that's what I did. The only thing I got away from, I remember putting, I think I was in Hotel California, I put Henley in the center speaker. Nothing else going there. I did the whole mix like that. And then somebody came in and said, well, can you solo the center speaker? And I did, and Weir was done. And he said, well, do you think Don would like that? Somebody being able to kill all the speakers and just hear Don? I said, well, maybe not. So I ended up redoing it and changing the vocal pattern. But it was a lot of learning going on with that.
Well, and that brings up another interesting point. Given the the magnitude of some of the artists you've worked with, Fleetwood Mac, the Eagles, Steely Dan, when you in your mind have got a mix together and you're like, this is it, is the whole band coming back to give you their feedback, or do they generally just send the one representative that's ultimately going to speak the voice for the band? Or do you literally have to hear how horrible every other person thinks? This isn't loud enough. That's not loud enough. The bass play. I mean, or is it generally a more organized kind of comment session?
I mean, there are guys like with the Eagles. It basically was Glenn Don.
Sure.
And, so they would have to approve, but they were the only guys that had to approve the mix. And they might not be there together, might be separate, but they would approve. Yeah. With Steely, it was always Donald, Walter, and Gary, and they were all there. So that, in fact, when we did Asia, that was the second song we mixed on the album. Jeez. And it took 3 days to mix because everything was on one 24-track analog tape. And I think if you actually broke it down by determining what was on tape, and if you split everything, it had to be close to 48 channels.
Wow.
But like in mixing that song, we ended up doing it in sections because you'd have a percussion track, but it would be followed by guitar on the same track. So everything had to change. You couldn't change it. Like EQ would change just from moment to moment. What's his name? The solo, sax solo. Names escape me now, but
that's all right.
There were 8 tracks of solo in between other things that were on tape. It was never comped because they didn't like comping. So I had to move what pieces were coming during the time of mix, go from one fader to the next. And some of it was tricky where they actually had to be slid. So it took about 3 days to mix. And we finally, we do the intro, stop, go to the first verse, take the two of them, edit them together. And we do that through the course of the song, never hearing the song as a whole. And we finally get done. And they all come to listen. Well, Donald and Walter were pretty much there all the time, but Gary wasn't. And Gary came in to listen, and he's standing in front of the console in between the speakers. And he listens to the whole thing, and he says, I think maybe you need more cymbals. And we just sort of went 3 days later. Are you kidding?
One of the things about that song, Asia in particular, that always I marvel at is on the outro, Steve Gadd is doing, he's playing his heart out. It's basically like a drum solo as the song fades out. But in many situations with that complexity of playing, you lose a lot of the detail as it's fading and crescendoing down. Yet you didn't. You can hear it as clear as day, even though you're aware the volume is getting quieter and quieter. You're still hearing every lick, every part of that drum performance that Steve is putting in. And I'm curious if that was a conscious decision or if that's just the cumulative effect of two masters at work, you and Steve doing what you do best.
Yeah, it wasn't conscious. It definitely was conscious, but can you curse on here?
Yeah, you can say whatever you want to say.
All right.
It's the internet.
When we mixed Asia, we finally got it, we were moving on at this point, and somebody came into the room and said, Steve's next door in the other room. Do you want him to come in and hear Asia? And Donald said, yeah, have him come in. And at that moment, he came in. He was a little out of it at that moment, and Walt says, "We want to play you Asia," and he wasn't quite sure what it was. Didn't make any sense. He didn't know names because they probably didn't have a name when they did the basics. And it goes down, he's hearing the whole song now, and he's listening to the solo and sort of, like confused looking. And it finally ends, and he looks over at Walter, he says, "Who's playing drums?" And we all started laughing. Walter looked at Steve and he said, "It's you, Steve." And he looked back up at Donald and Walter and said, "Wow, I'm a motherfucker."
He is not wrong. He is not wrong. He is not wrong.
Definitely. I mean, it's so amazing. It was take.
Do you find as you look back, so you shift, so you go from Asian, you the Billy Joel record, obviously with one of his biggest hits ever on the planet, which I'm sure he didn't know at the time was going to be. Do you find, was it difficult for you to transition between sort of the extreme nature of, even in the pop spectrum, the artists you were working with? I mean, Steely Dan is very different than Billy Joel, is very different than Fleetwood Mac. I mean, as you roll through all these changes, there are some things in pop music that were kind of consistent at the time. But I mean, these were different times. Artists were very varied, as we know, in their presentation. Did you find it difficult to make those transitions from project to project?
If it was right after a project you finished, it was sometime you'd be getting drum sounds or something and hearing somebody else play and thinking, "Oh God, I wish I was still doing this other thing." But you got to pretty quickly and devoted your entire attention to a new project. Chances are it was something that was never going to be successful. You didn't go from doing Steely to doing Fleetwood.
Right.
There wasn't, you go from doing Steely to doing an unknown that you knew probably wouldn't happen. When you think about the time period, the record companies would sign, hundreds of bands and give you an enormous amount of money to spend doing this. And when you finish your record, and I've heard, I was never a part of any meetings, but I've heard stories where at Warner Brothers, they have all these A&R guys sitting there listening to new projects, and they wouldn't even think about what they spent on it. When somebody would say, "Well, I don't think this is going to work. I think we should just
move on.
We wouldn't even move money into this." And that was that. And you just spend maybe 4 or 5 months doing a record with an unknown artist, and they didn't know that might happen.
Sure. So as you're going through all these projects and all these different phases of your career, do you find that there are any key pieces of equipment that you then are bringing with you or relying on as you go from studio to studio, band to band? Is there anything in your repertoire that's made it on most of your recordings, gear-wise? A compressor, a microphone, anything in particular?
Usually a Fairchild. Every place I work has at least one Fairchild.
That's
and
the one.
I don't use it to record, but if I'm mixing, there are a couple of things I'll use a Fairchild on. I've also used the old 2-inch version of DBX 160s.
Okay.
And I actually, on Steely, because I never used compressors when I recorded, they'd hear something and say, "Why don't you put the 160 on the roads?" Really? What for?
Yeah.
but they'd have something in their mind that they want to hear that on, and I would barely touch it. If I was recording, you couldn't see anything move.
Mm.
But to them, it was, yeah, this is good.
Yeah, of
And
course.
I never knew what they were thinking. They said, oh, yeah, this is good.
Wow. So
Yeah.
as you're going through this process, obviously you had mentioned earlier that the studio you work in these days, we've got the Neeve Desk out there that you love. As you were sort of coming through this whole process of your career, did you have an instant love affair with the Neeve, or was it something that you acquired ultimately through working on SSLs and APIs and MCIs and Tridents? I mean, did you have to get there, or was it pretty instant? Like, this is fun for me from a mix and recording standpoint.
Yeah, it was instant.
Yeah. What do you remember the first Neeve Desk you worked on?
Yeah, it was an AD-68.
Where was it?
It was at A&R.
Really? Wow. Okay.
Yeah, the console I mixed Asia on it was some console. It's called Audio Designs.
Okay.
I don't think they made many of them, but it was a great sounding console. But it only had like 28 faders. And in the room the room was huge. It was a room that Frank Sinatra made all those big orchestra recordings, and
Wow.
it was just a wrong console for that. So they ended up putting an AD-68 in there, and on the audio designs, you'd look at fader for a guitar or whatever and say, well, this needs something. Let me move the mic, let me change the mic, maybe some EQ. There were actually EQs online on the audio designs. And but with the Neeve, the first time I opened the kick drum, didn't need anything. No, oh my God. How is this possible? Yeah.
Wow. So was there any, no, we don't want to slag any manufacturers, but were there any desks in the 80s or the 90s where you would roll into a session, you'd be like, ugh, you'd be like, I can't believe this is what I'm going to have to work with today. Was there anything that was the bane of your existence?
Well, usually if I was working at a place, I'd know what was in there. And I'd say, can I get a rack of Neeve mic pre's? Mm-hmm. I'd always submit stuff that I knew I needed. For drums, I'd always have Neeve mic pre's on any console. Generally, though, most of the consoles had their own sound. They were all good sounding in so many respects, whether it's SSL or API. They all, we worked at studios where everything was kept up. Everything sounded great. They were brand new or newer. They didn't require capacitor replacements yet. Everything sounded good. So, you knew where you were and you brought stuff with you. I actually brought my own speakers at that point.
What were you bringing?
I still have them in the basement. What was the name of that? We mix all the Steely stuff on these.
So they were not NS10s. You did not mix Asia on NS10s.
No.
Wow.
No, I wasn't using NS10s at that point. I didn't start on NS10s till about 1980.
Wow.
Yeah.
And did you do that because everyone else was doing that and it was expected, or was it a natural sort of like, give it a try?
No, we all tried to use a smaller speaker, close field, that didn't sound good, and Bob Clearmountain said, these things, you can have trouble with these things. You have to focus pretty closely. But when you get to a point where you're happy, you put that on any other speaker, you're going to feel great.
Mm.
So I moved over to the In a Sense at that point, and it was hard to listen to. But I found out after doing something that I recorded and playing it on anything else, you know, I sounded like, wow, am I a genius or what? It was like in England, they didn't use NAB standards.
Okay.
They used CCIR standards, different configuration, different alignment. And I went to Air to record. Do you remember Petula Clark?
Mm-hmm. Of course, downtown.
I went to do it with a record with her. And I was bringing it back here to the stage to finish. And I got back to A&R and listened to it. There was the CCIR curve was amazing sounding when you played it, NAB. I remember hearing Elton John's first record for the first time going, who did this? Why does it sound so unlike anything ever recorded? And a lot of it was the curve.
Wow.
Yeah.
Holy
it was
cow.
amazing.
So more recently, I mean, it wasn't super recent, but more recently, you were involved with the Foo Fighters. You had done the record in your honor. What was that like? Again,
that was unbelievable because there was an electric record and an acoustic record.
Yep.
And their producer, Nick, decided to do it old style on at least on the acoustics.
Mm-hmm.
There was one cut. All the drums were on one track.
Wow.
It was, like, oh my God. And they sounded great.
Yeah, it's a great record.
So, I was working with really old style and really enjoying it. And I got them with all the stereos, and they had no problem. They loved it. It was all good. But I had to do 5/1s on everything.
Wow.
They were working on the electric record in the Valley.
Okay.
And I was working with Capitol, and they couldn't very well come down every day or every other day to hear an immersive. So it was too difficult to install immersive there at that point. And but I had just a year before finished doing 5/1 in a car. And it was in all the Acuras at that point. And I called up Acura and I said, there was this one girl, and I knew she was a Foo Fighters fan. I said, look, can we get a car out to Dave in the Valley at his studio so he can hear the system? Leave it there for a couple of weeks. And that's how they determined the mix on 5/1. They would all get in the car and switch around and listen to it that way.
Jeez.
That was amazing.
Was that, correct me if I'm wrong, this 5/1 car thing you did, that was a venture between you and Panasonic, right?
Yeah.
So
it still
you
is.
helped develop this technology that ultimately is in these vehicles that it kind of brings the music to life while you're driving. So that's spectacular.
Yeah, no, it was great because here we were working on all these 5/1s, and for what purpose? How are they going to hear? They didn't have 5/1 systems, and they weren't going to set it up. They needed to have it set up for them. And I got the idea of the cars, and I went to some kind of DVD empire consortium, and it was all manufacturers of hardware for cars,
Mm-hmm.
for sound systems. And there were about eight companies there. And I went to each one and I said, at this idea, there's now a 5-1 market. We're making 5-1 mixes. And it would seem like the only reasonable place to hear this would be in the car.
Mm.
And I've got an idea about this. And each one of the 8 said, nah. And even if we did, we certainly don't need you to do this.
Mm.
I said, okay. And I went home, didn't think about it. About 6 months later, I get a call from Panasonic. And they said, we have a customer who thinks the idea is great. And they actually want to put a 5-1 system in their car. And I went out to Detroit and met with them and did a sample of what it would be like. And that's it. We want this.
Wow.
And that's how it took off. And to this day, I mean, I'm at the end of my term with Acura. And I don't know if they're going to do immersive at all. Now they seem to be focusing on mainly stereo. But I mean, Dave Grohl, when he heard 5-1 for the first time in the car, bought one.
Wow.
Joe Walsh did the same thing. The guys were buying, even engineers were buying, cars so they can hear what their stuff sounded like in a car.
Sure.
So I thought it was a great thing.
To that end, while you think about and you talk about immersive, do you ever wonder if the 11.1 format could ever even really be scalable for, home entertainment? Can the average person outside of their vehicle really benefit from this? Is it something you ever see in someone's living room? Is it going to be a new standard?
Well, as far as the living room, it's, they have a column, and from this one column, it's immersive. For the cars, some people are doing it. A similar one for us. And I think Mercedes is doing it.
Sure.
And there's a Chinese car company that's doing it. But, Dolby is supplying the idea for it. When I did 5-1s for Acura, you could buy a DTS chip or a Dolby chip for $1. And that was all that was there. That's all you needed. Now, Dolby wants $15 for a chip, a decoder. And the problem with that is $15 to an auto manufacturer. That's your armrest.
Yeah.
So what did we do? Take the armrests away? They think old style, and that's why there's only a couple of cars that really have this.
Sure.
So
it's a long way. It could happen, but we're not there yet. We're just not there yet.
Correct. Yeah, I think Dolby has to lower their prices.
Well, they're the biggest player in the game, right? To your point. So very much like the first mover advantage. They got there first. They get to kind of set the pace, and we're just starting to feel it, as you know, now in what I would like to consider blue collar music. Guys who record in the bedroom or at home are now just waking up to, oh, this is a thing that happens. Do I need to be involved in it? I've seen a lot of, speaker manufacturers pivoting that way to being like, hey, maybe think about this. And so it's a very interesting trend, at least here in the States right now, about the debate. It's very much like the debate on AI music, right? It's very fresh and it's on everyone's mind. Whether or not anything will ever come of it, who knows? But it's definitely something fun to talk about. Now, have you had any opportunities, speaking of that, or done any investigating into this whole AI music phenomena that's been happening as of late?
No.
Good. That's the best answer I've heard yet. Hopefully hopefully we get more people with that answer. It's an interesting scenario. And again, for you in particular, I mean, you've seen technologies come and go. You've obviously tape. Was there any technology format, whether it's a DAT, the ADAT, the blue, where you looked at it immediately when it's on, you just did the same thing? No, not interested. Where you weren't really that optimistic about its future?
Well, at this point, no. Back in the old days, we went from, I remember as really young, working for Phil, when we finished, I would run off a 7.5 tape copy for a client to take home.
Wow.
And then it went to, and actually before that, we were actually cutting vinyl. Doing a vinyl press, we had a mono cutting room, and we'd cut a mono for them to take home to listen to. And so it went from vinyl to tape copies to cassettes, eventually CDs, but and all those except for the vinyl, you take a look at each one, they didn't really become big until it was in the cars.
It's true.
Once it got in the cars, cassette, 8-track, CDs, DVDs, it was all based on the car. And it didn't become popular within our industry. Can we sell this? Well, with CDs, people weren't buying CD players right away. They were so expensive. But having it in the car
changed everything. Yeah.
Yep. Yeah.
So speaking of keeping good company, I want to talk a little bit about Meta Alliance, because obviously you're strongly involved in that. For the people that are listening that aren't aware of the Meta Alliance, can you give us a kind of an overview of how you guys came to be and what you guys are all about?
Yeah. With Meta Alliance, it was started originally with Ed Cherney, myself, Al Schmidt, George Messemer, Chuck Ainley, Phil Ramone, and Frank Filippetti. And we started it. It was all about how we wanted people to hear music. We're coming down to MP3s that's the way everybody was hearing. And we wanted to offer a better way. Listen to this. Listen to how music sounds in this. And we were going around the country doing programs speaking about, there is a better way to listen to music. And that was our whole point in time also, because engineers couldn't get medical coverage. And, you had to buy it personally. It's very expensive. So we were also organizing to try and get somebody, some company or the Grammys to do medical coverage for anyone.
Wow.
Yeah, and it eventually happened the past few years, but it was originally started by Ed. Ed came with the idea because in Europe, a producer would get paid for airplay. In this country, we couldn't get paid for airplay. We only got paid on sales. And Ed was trying to develop the Meta Alliance, and it was to swing it with what was called the MPNE. I think they handle all the airplay money for all the artists
Okay.
and engineers and producers in Europe. And we were trying to get the same thing here. So we tried to get this to function like that. It was very, very difficult. We couldn't do anything right. And Actually, that time was called Madeleine. It was called MPE.
Hmm.
Yeah, MPE. And the Recording Academy loved the idea, and they actually asked us if we would sign that over to the Academy, which we did because we thought it would serve a great purpose doing that. But we felt that it ended up not happening.
Hmm.
Then we started being friction county with all the new formats. And we also want to be able to, for new equipment, to listen to it and respond to it. And all seven of us had to have the same viewpoint. We'd listen to a piece of gear, and the idea was, this gear worthy for a professional? Could this do what a pro would want? And we'd just do it. And, we would make that determination. If one guy said, no way, I am not going to do this. This is terrible. And it went down tubes.
Wow.
But most of the time, we came to an agreement on what was good and what wasn't. And that's what the original purpose was. And we started doing that. And then at some point, we started doing in-sessions where we would do recording sessions, all of us, at one facility. We lived in Capitol, Blackbird, Power Station, and showing different methods and what we do and how to do something better than what you taught. And we had pretty good turnout for that. So we were doing that up to this year, and now we're just sort of laying back on and considering with YouTube, considering other ways of doing this and making it free, because we were charging money for this and we weren't making money. We were just charging to break even.
Sure.
And but it was costly, and a student couldn't pay $1,200 for a weekend.
Sure.
So we think maybe now trying to do something on YouTube would be the best way of doing it. We've also, you probably don't know about this, we have a show. It's a stage show.
Wow.
Yeah, we, for years and years, and I remember going to studio, and you went to a studio where there were three other rooms, and Ed would be in one room and Al might be in another. And, Al would always come walk into your control room and say, I got a joke for you, or I'll tell you a story. You're in the middle of something, but you stop, Fred. And so he came up, I came up with this idea, we should do a show. We've all told each other about stories, good and bad, that have happened to us over a great period of time. Maybe we should tell these people. So we did our first show in February to a sold-out crowd, and we told stories.
Wow.
About stupid stuff that happened to us.
Those are the best stories. The stupid stuff stories.
Netherlands has now changed because Phil died, Al died, and Ed died. And so we added Judy Douglas, Sylvia Massey, and Nico Bowles. And so it's all changed a bit, but they came into it with the great stories too. And you couldn't help it. When Sylvia, we were in a room and we started expressing what we'd like to do for the first stories. And Sylvia she was killing us with her stories, So we did this, and it worked out great. We got a sizzle reel on it, and we want to take it further.
Wow.
We want to do this.
That's amazing. Again, it's hours of entertainment for people interested in this sort of thing. So, I mean, that's what's fantastic about it.
Like, there were 7 of us. We each told 2 stories, and time was up, And I said, the bad thing about this, you've heard some, but you haven't heard hundreds of other stories, and they all wanted to stay. They just want to stay and hear more stories.
Well, that's all we have left, right? I mean, and I mean that in the most respectful way. I mean, these records or this music that folks like you and of your ilk and caliber have worked on, I mean, have defined generations of people, generations of pop and music, and believe it or not, to your point, generations of equipment. I mean, the way your generation made records changed the way manufacturers made equipment to make records. And that's a unique position to be in from a storytelling standpoint, because you've seen so many things. I mean, literally in this podcast, we've talked about Petula Clark, Acura cars, and the Eagles. Where else in the world would any normal human being have a conversation about those 3 things in one sitting? It wouldn't happen. Yeah. And that I have this question too. So throughout the course of your career, because of the breadth of work you've done, I would think there were times where you had to turn projects down because you didn't have time or you just couldn't get there. Is there anything you turned down that you look back on and wish you wouldn't have?
Yes.
What is it?
Steely was doing a cut for a movie, was called FM.
Okay.
And it was a huge hit.
Mm-hmm.
They asked me to do it, and I was booked. Actually, in the same facility at Studio 55 in LA.
Okay.
And they were doing FM in the other room, and I was doing Grease in the other room.
Wow.
And when it came down to it, I mean, I loved doing Grease.
Yeah, how could you not?
I mean, it was so John Farrar. I mean, he was the classic producer. He was an amazing human being. Still is.
One of the best soundtracks ever recorded, in my opinion, my humble opinion. So,
it was great.
Wow.
But when it came down to it in the end, FM as a single, got the engineering Grammy.
Wow. Who ended up doing that job? Who ended up doing the engineering?
Al Schmidt.
Okay, well, you're in good company, as you know. Wow.
Yeah.
So are those tough decisions to make, or are they based on loyalty? Today, I would argue a lot of people would make that decision based on money. Then I feel there was more of an honor to the fact that you had made a commitment to someone. You were going to do what you said you were going to do, and that's how that played. That's just that simple.
That's what it was. You got the same money for everybody.
Yeah.
Somebody said to me, like, when I won the Grammy for Asia, that was the first one, somebody at the party said to me, you can increase your rates now. If somebody calls you, tell them you want this amount of money. And I did. Very next morning, I got a call, and I didn't know these people at the time, and they wanted me to come to England and mix a record. It was a Jimmy Buffett record.
Wow.
I knew Jimmy. I knew of his song at the time, but knew nothing else. And Norbert Putnam said, "What do you get?" And then I doubled my rate. And he said, "Okay, no problem." He said, "How do you want to come over? Do you want to take the QE2 or Concorde?"
Wow.
I said, I'd like to take Concorde.
Wow. Well, Norbert Putnam's that's we could have a 7-hour conversation about what a beautiful human person he is, period, hands down.
He is.
But I find, as I have the privilege of hearing stories from this magical time in music. Generally, at the end of the stories, a lot of times people lament, or they're like, "Well, we said, the good old days. I wish it was like that now." Are you happy with where the industry is now? I mean, obviously, you've seen so many different phases of it, and so many things have come and gone and come back around again and will leave again. Is this where you thought we would all end up eventually?
I didn't know. I mean, I'm happy in terms of the quality of my work. I love what I'm doing. I can say that I'm happy with music overall. You know, like you would listen. I remember when a new record came out on vinyl, like, you know, I'd get it right away, go back home, put on a pair of headphones and listen to this record and read the album cover. And in some cases, it was a mystery. It was so magical. Like the first time I heard Abbey Road in headphones, I couldn't believe it. The first time I heard Sgt. Pepper, that's what made me want to become an engineer. And I read the album cover and it said Jeff Emmerich. And I said, I want to be this guy. I want to be Jeff Emmerich. And for the longest time, all I thought about was Jeff Emmerich's work. And finally, I had the opportunity to meet him. And we became fast friends. You know, I would go into a session, watch him record, and watch how he recorded drums. And it was the Beatles. You know, it was so mind-boggling to me to watch his setup and how he recorded. And oh my God, this is incredible.
Wow.
Yeah, this is a shame, you know, another guy who died. And really not for any reason at all. You know, he got sick, but, you know, a great talent.
As you see things, again, morphing, and you've seen, again, all of these things, and guys like you are still standing, still working, still, you know, everyone in the Metal Alliance, basically, everyone you talked about, this kind of league of extraordinary ladies and gentlemen, all still working actively, just continuing to move through. Do you ever think about that here are this group of people who have collectively basically shaped the sound of North American music overall, still, regardless of what gets thrown at them, working? Do you ever take a minute and just kind of smell the roses and say, this has been a good thing still?
We hadn't. We never did. But when we did the show in February, the guy who announced us to the audience said, you know, this is going to be a special night. We have 7 people here who have made all the music that you listen to. They are iconic figures. And then we all looked at each other and said, really? You know, and it has a great deal of history, you know, and we look at each other's recordings and go, you did this? I was amazed at some of the people that the other guys recorded.
When you're in your group, though, when you guys are behind closed doors and you're all talking, are you competitive when it comes to awards and Grammys? Do you rub it in someone's face that you have more Grammys than them or platinum records than them?
No, not at all.
Not even in fun?
Not at all. We all would make fun of Al. Because Al had
everything.
23 Grammys.
Yeah, this is ridiculous.
You go, okay, Al's got something and everybody else loses. You know, but between us, since Metal Alliance, we had a total of 67 Grammys amongst us that we individually have.
That's great. Well, you have 8 alone, so it's
Yeah,
was that ever even a consideration for you as you were coming up? Did you ever even think that that would be something that happened in your life?
the
The
very
Grammys.
first time I wanted to think that maybe someday I could get a Grammy, and it was right after Asia. And I think, well, maybe this could do it. And I remember my uncle was a studio musician, a swing player originally, but, played on a lot of hit singles. And he called me up the day of the Grammys and said, "You're going to win this tonight."
Wow.
I said, "How do you know?" And they said, "Believe me, I know you're going to win this."
Wow.
And, and when it happened, it was like, it was incredible.
And were you happy? Were you at that moment where you're like, well, okay, I did it. I got a Grammy. Did you ever think there'd be 7 more that followed throughout your
No,
career?
no, I didn't think about it much,
Right.
because I had a Grammy for a record that I thought was pretty amazing sounding.
Well, you're right. It's a genre defined. I mean, that is a record that stands all tests of time on every level. Like I said, it's a record that other records are measured by. And you're here and I'll ask, but I'm almost certain your answer will be no. I'm sure that wasn't the intent when you made it. It's not like a group of people sat down and said, let's make the perfect record that everybody else will listen to and measure their records by.
Yeah.
It was the culmination of all your talent and all of the hard work, like you said, and the energy and the writing and the effort and it sounds great, erase it. I mean, that story alone was heartbreaking. To hear a story where it's like, yep, let's work on something for 9 hours and it's not digital. You can't just open another track underneath it and do another take. It's like, nope, we got to erase it. We need the tape.
Yeah,
That's like, whoa.
That was it.
It's like, what? How does that even work? I mean, the discipline, the decision-making, a lot of things that is still out there. But again, digital technology does create the opportunity for limitless, endless opportunity. I mean, you can record 3,500 takes of one thing and keep them all and determine which one you want later. So it was a different time, to your point. Asia is this master class in decision making is really what records used to be. And the engineer, as you have so poignantly pointed out, was a very big part of that decision making because you're here. We have to commit today. It's either going to do this or we're not going to do this.
Right.
So what are we doing?
Yeah, the last Steely record I did, whatever the name was, we go into record the first day, and Walter said, "I want to do this digital." And I looked at him and said, "Are you serious?" And he said, "Yeah, I think it'll be much easier for us, and it'll sound better."
Wow.
I said, "Okay, I'm going to set up the analog as well. And we'll do analog and digital, same takes.
Wow.
And I'll play them back to you." And it took about an hour to set up. We did the analog and dig, and I could switch between the machines synced up, and they could make their decisions. And so I had everything lined up. We did our first take, just first reference take. And I played one and then the other. And together, Don and Walter would go, "This one." And I'd switch back. Nothing. I'd switch back. "Yeah, this sounds better." "Is this the ditch?" So no, it's the analog. And they made the commitment. They said, "Okay, let's do it." And
wow.
What was funny, do you know who Keith Carlock is?
Yeah, drummer, fantastic player. I mean,
amazing player.
Incredible.
So we get the first song done, and Walter says, "Let's edit that solo section from the very last take, editing to this one." Wow. So I was cutting analog. So I'm in there and I'm cutting analog, and Keith comes up and he says, "What are you doing?" I said, "I'm editing the analog tape." He said, "You cut it?" I said,
wow.
yeah, you cut it. And he said, holy shit, I am amazed, you
Wow.
know. And it was, he grew up in a different
Yeah.
generation.
Which is
Didn't know.
funny because he plays traditional grip. So you would think
Oh,
he would have
yeah.
that. And to this day, I've never seen anyone that plays traditional grip hit as hard as he can strike a drum with that particular technique. It is awe-inspiring to watch his playing. I mean, again, it's so fluid and effortless, and then you see that power, and you're like, wow. I can't imagine you watching the microphones every time his hand comes down. Okay, is he going to crack that one? Is he going to hit that one? That's got to be a
He
joy.
never did that. I mean, he
I'm not
was super.
surprised.
And I don't know of anyone that's hit harder than Keith.
It's crazy.
Yeah.
Which is also in the context of Steely Dan. You mentioned all of the phenomenal drummers you've worked with just in that band alone. I mean, basically every amazing studio player that's ever existed has done something for or in that band. Do you find that the drummers come in to any particular project with an expectation of the kind of sound you're going to get out of their instrument, or do they generally come in pretty open-minded and figure that it's going to be up to you and the writers how the sound goes?
Um, yeah, that's a good question. They wouldn't necessarily come in expecting, oh, no, I want this to be that way. They would never say that. But one night, actually, when we recorded Peg, Rick Miranda came in. He said, man, I just came back from LA. This engineer, and I'll leave nameless, put an Sony ECM 50 inside the drum. Just
Isn't that
as
the game show microphone? The long, isn't that?
yeah,
Yeah,
it's
like the
no,
all the no, it's little. Okay,
yeah. And Walter looked at him and he said, okay, we'll try it. So I put it in there and we brought it up, and it was the worst thing I have ever heard. And Walter got him talked to me, and he said, hey, Rick, we're going to try something different. We're standard miking.
as you were working though and moving again through your career, did you find that a lot of people would ask for certain sounds you had produced on previous records? Would they come to you and say, hey, I want this from the Billy Joel, or this from the Fleetwood, or this from Steely Dan? Or
I've had people say Steely, can we get the Steely sound like that?
no?
But generally, no. In the early days, like I had a huge hit with Van Morrison. It was my first hit record. And I was feeling myself, like, oh, I'm great. I can do anything now. And this band came in unknown, and they wanted me to start with the drummer and get the drum sounds, and the rest of the band will be in later. And I got drum sounds on the drummer, and the singer came in and said, I don't like this. Well, what are you thinking? And he said, well, I just don't like this. It's got to be something else. And I took it like he was condemning me to what I do.
Mm.
And I was resentful and didn't like it.
Right.
We finally finished up. It was a week of recording, and I went to Phil. At some point, I told him what had happened, and I ended up with something I don't like, but they like. And he said, you got to understand, you're a soldier. You have to do what they want. It's their recording. Your name is not on the front of that record, if it's on it at all. You have to do what they want, and that's all that matters.
Wow.
You can offer a suggestion, but if they want something different, you have to do it.
Sage
And,
advice.
and from that moment on, I was a soldier every day of my life.
Wow.
They didn't
It
like
seems to have worked well for you. I just point
yeah,
that
I
out.
said, you don't like what I did? I'll do it whatever you want. Yeah, it just, you go through that period. And I saw a lot of people that went through that where they thought their shit was great and people were coming to them because of this record or whatever. And it may have been for a while for some guys, but at some point it's not your record.
No, you're just a part of the process. Important
Yeah,
part, but part of the process. Wow.
exactly.
So let me ask you this: that here's not the obvious question. So now what? So here you are. We're here and we're talking. You still have plenty of life ahead of you. All the stuff that we can always draw back on. What's next for you? What do we do for Elliot now?
Well, I'm liking the storytellers.
That's cool.
You know,
I'm not
I
gonna lie.
really
That's
like
pretty
that.
cool.
And all of us want to do a European tour and a Japan tour and talk about the making of music and what it was like for us and the good and bad stories. And we really enjoy being with each other. I mean, more than anything, the seven of us, we like each other and we want to hang out.
Wow.
And that's possibly next, but I still like making records. For me, at this point, I think it's primarily going to be jazz because with jazz, they're all in the same room. They all play off each other. And you hear a bass player who's answering a guitar player or a piano player, and he plays something so unreal. And that's what I know. That's what I remember. I want to do that.
Wow.
You know, I'm going to say something now because you haven't asked me anything about this. But, you know, I did this.
I feel like I'm in trouble.
No, I did this sampling session for Tune Tracks.
Yes, you did.
And it was, I mean, I felt after it was in there, I didn't work enough, you know, but what I did, we worked up at the clubhouse in Rhinebeck, and the difference in sounds from in the studio to one booth to another booth to on a set of risers, not on a set of risers, different mics, you know, was I haven't heard it all done at this point, you know, and I appreciate both those guys for the work they did. It was so I can't describe it because they were so genuine and it was so they made you want to do whatever you did. And for a couple of the sounds one of the sounds I came up with was a 70s like Philly sound, you know, dry, you know, with the drums even out in a room of any kind, you know. But when I listened to it that day, I was like, this is just incredible, you know, and I'm still waiting. I have to do a mix of what I would like, you know, which I'm really looking forward to do, but I guess they're not finished yet.
So the process is incredibly painstaking, as you know, on the back end, simply because what we're dealing with when we work with the people we work with, which are people like you, is the misnomer or the generic term would be the equivalent of calling every tissue Kleenex, right? We call it sampling, but it's really not, because if you were going to sample something, you'd be taking a small piece of it. We're doing multi-track programmable drum recordings with the greatest engineers and producers in the world. So you laugh about not working, and we do we hear that a lot from producers. Like, I feel like I didn't really do much, but the reality is our success and the reason our products are so well respected and embraced by our users is simply because we know what we do, and we know that we're not record producers. We know that we love music, and we know who makes the records we love. And spoiler alert, you're one of those guys. So when Damien and Norman show up to do a session with you at the clubhouse, there's a reason we make sure the producer picks the studio and has an idea for the drums, and even down to Artie, getting the drum tech out and finding someone. It's a community. We, very much like you, have been fortunate enough to work in that musical community environment where it's literally a team working on a project. And as you pointed out in some of your stories, that's irreplaceable. You can't manufacture that. You can't. If someone doesn't get along, it's instantly apparent. If someone's not doing what they're supposed to do, it shows. And if there's any sort of chink in that armor, as they say, it will come out in the recording, just like it used to in old records. So for us, your session went the way that it did because we are fans. That's the other great luxury of doing what we do is we don't have some innocuous obligatory marketing plan or list of like, well, if we do this, we'll sell. This company operates in its purest form like bands used to. We're going to do what we really enjoy. We're going to do it to the best of our ability, and people are either going to like it or they're not. So when we got the opportunity to work with you, Duck, Here Comes Some Love. This is a privilege for us. We don't ever take that for granted. When our guys show up to a session, if I have the privilege to go, if anyone from TuneTrack shows up to do what we're doing, it is with the greatest respect and honor for not only the music, but the people we're working with, because we realize how fortunate we are. And I think when you hear it, I think you're going to be impressed. Obviously the greatest compliment we generally get is it sounds just like it did when we were there. And that's normally what we're going for. We're not trying to turn it into something it's not. We wanted Elliot's drum sounds. So we got Elliot's drum sounds. And again, this product, all the things we do, but getting the opportunity to work with people of your caliber it's never, ever, ever going to be lost on us how fortunate we are. And we just hope that everything we do continues your legacy. We hope that because your name is associated with this, you're proud of it. That's really what we're going for.
Damien played me Hugh Padgham's work. I love you. And just having the ability to hear these guys and what they do. And, if you want to use, the bass drum that you recorded is amazing. And it's such a great marketplace.
Well, and the Hugh session is special to all of us, not just because Hugh, like yourself, is a legend, but that was actually done during the height of COVID. Obviously, COVID changed a lot of things for all of us because so much of our music industry and community is travel and interaction and people. And when that gets shut down, that's difficult. But Norman and Damien, Damien lives in the UK, flew to the UK, and they met Hugh at British Grove. And British Grove was kind enough and accommodating, and we set it up with the social distancing and the masks and minimal crew, the whole 9 yards. And they were able to do that at the height of this dark period of time in cultural and world history. So when we listen to it, we just are overjoyed at the fact that through all of that, we were still able to pull something beautiful and musical out of what was arguably in the past couple of centuries like a really horrible time in human history. So it's and again, like yourself, just another person who. Not that I want there to ever be any more openings in Meta. I think the 7 are great. But if you ever have to, someone else that you have to, Hugh, talk about stories. I'm sure he's got stories just like the rest of you that's liven everything up.
I know. There are so many people that would work in here.
Sure.
You, Juan, Kevin Killen. Yeah. There's just a bunch of guys. Dorfman would work.
Neil Dorfman.
Yeah, so many guys that will work in here. So,
well, you never know. It's a long life, and all these guys are still around, so it's a beautiful thing.
Yeah.
I'm going to let you get back to a normal life and stuff. I could talk to you for 17 hours, but I think we'd probably kill the audience. But I cannot tell you, so I'll try in the words I have available. We're just very, very grateful, and we're humbled and honored to be a part of your world. And we thank you for taking time out for us today. We're fans.
No, I'm really happy. I'm glad we did this, and I so believe in what you guys do. When you hear Jimmy Douglas talk about the way records are being made, and he's totally into the whole hip hop and rap thing. And he said, these guys coming in with samples and, where are they getting it from? And he said, most everything happens from tune tracks and the shit sounds great. And Jimmy even said, I've forgotten how to record drums now.
Complimentary. I doubt that, but complimentary nonetheless. We'll take it. I mean, it's a privilege and we're grateful. So I thank you for your time, my friend. And I know this won't be the last time we interact. I'm looking forward to whatever comes next. Enjoy the rest of the day. Get out, enjoy the weather.
You have a good day. If you speak to Damien or Norman, give them my regards.
I will.
And I will. Have a great day in Chicago.
You stay having a great day on the East Coast. Hopefully you have the weather we're having and you can get outside and get some fresh air. I'll talk to you soon. Have a great day, my friend.
All right, Rick. Take care, bud.